Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Dave Robbins with Endtime Ministries. Thank you so much for joining me on this edition of the Endtime Show. And wow, have I been looking forward to this interview for years now. You know, most people in the United States, they get mesmerized by inflation and supply shortages and global warming and just a million other things. But they completely miss the much larger story that is really affecting all of our lives. You know, it brings up a million questions. Are there really international elites that run the world and the economy of the United States? So, to help me answer these questions is the author of two very influential books, The Fearful Master, Exposing the United Nations World Governing Aspirations, and The Creature from Jekyll Island, Exposing the Federal Reserve and a Banking Cartel. So with that said, I want to welcome Mr. G Edward Griffin to the Endtime Show. Thank you, Mr. Griffin, for being with me today.
Well, it's a pleasure being here. So thanks for inviting me. I like that introduction that narrows the field right down to the core of what's going on in the world.
Absolutely. And again, like we talked about earlier, we here at Endtime Ministries, we specialize in eschatology and Bible prophecy and things like that. But you and I are not going to focus on that today, because I wanted to go through these two books because I think the majority of the population in the United States and around the world, they really don't have a clue about who really is running our lives. There is a fearful master, and there is a group of elites around the world that are trying to control every single aspect of every person's life on the planet. They've got this mindset, and they've been grooming politicians and people for years for all of this. And I know that you have written you've written many books, but two very influential books that I wanted to cover today, The Fearful Master and The Creature from Jekyll Island, to really help our audience understand who is really running the world. And I know you've done your homework. I know The Creature from Jekyll Island, I think it took you like 7 years to write that book, among other things. And so you've done your research, and I will tell you that I have a friend, his father, I just talked to him last week. His father worked at the Federal Reserve. I think he was like a G15 or something like that. He was right under Greenspan and Yellen, and he presented them with your book. And he said that they took it, went through it, and they came back to him and said, wow, that's quite interesting. They never denied anything in the book, but they just told him, wow, that's a quite interesting read. And so he said the key thing was they didn't deny one word of it. And so I know that it is true. I've done my research, and I researched many different aspects of this, and it's been very influential to a lot of people. And so thank you for joining me today, and I'm going to get right off into it. I want to start with The Fearful Master, talking about the United Nations today. So Mr. Griffin, give me a definition, or just tell me, what is the United Nations? As we talked before, my father-in-law, Irvin Baxter, when he came out of high school, this would have been back in the early 60s, he had a book that had one whole page in the back, and it said, The United Nations, the last great humanitarian hope for mankind. But I'm not so sure that that is a true statement. So if you would, tell me, what is the United Nations?
Well, yeah, I really relate to your story about that book with the last page describing the United Nations in glorious terms, because that was my impression of the organization also. You know, I went through the school system like everybody else, and I tried to study hard, and I never questioned the authority and knowledge of my teachers. So when they taught me that the United Nations was our last best hope for peace, well, I believed it, and I thought, that's wonderful. I'm so glad to hear that, because the world is burdened with wars and famine and treachery and hatred. Well, let's get rid of all that stuff, and maybe the United Nations is the tool to do it. And so I was totally on board, and somewhat like you, I came across a pamphlet. This was after I had been married, and I was climbing the corporate ladder and all that, trying to carve a place for myself in the material world. I wanted to make a lot of money and be an executive in a large corporation and have a nice car and, have all the good things that,
Sure.
like most young people are. I was totally materialistic. And so I came across this pamphlet, and it was written by some college professor who I never heard of before or since, who taught in some Midwestern university, which I still can't remember which it was, but it was some small university. And he was very critical of the UN. And I was incensed because I too knew that it was our last best hope for peace.
Right.
So I was highly incensed by it, but it jolted me enough. You might find this interesting. After I came out of school, I really was not much interested in ever going back in a library. I thought that was sort of like a torture chamber for young people who really would rather be outside having fun.
Sure.
Rather than reading old dusty books and things. Anyway, I went to the library to see if I could confirm or contradict some of the things that this professor had said. And lo and behold, I found out he was right. And that was the first crack in the egg for me. Mm-hmm. And as you know, my first book was on the United Nations, mm-hmm. called The Fearful Master, a second look at the United Nations. And that was the product of that one crack. And I think it's significant because I'm sure we'll be talking today on many other issues than the UN. Mm-hmm. But for most of us that came out of the educational system, or let's call it what it is, the mind conditioning system of not only the educators, but the media, and to a large extent, even to the pulpit and so forth, we get information and values presented to us by people who we consider to be authorities, and we just buy into it. Well, once that first crack is cracked, you begin to think, what else have I been fooled about?
Sure.
And the first thing you know, the crack gets wider and splits out, and you come to somewhere down the line, somewhere in midpoint in your life, you say, oh my gosh, everything I thought I knew was wrong. Mm-hmm. And that's when your friends start looking at you and saying, what's wrong with this guy? He's gone off the deep end, because they haven't had that first crack yet.
Yeah.
So anyway, I just thought you might find that interesting, because I think the kind of issues we'll be talking about are strange to the ear of the average person out there. They don't hear this on television or on the internet.
Yeah.
So
I'm going to break in on you. I got a break coming up, and then.
Okay, good break. Good point to do that, because I'm finally going to answer your question.
Yeah. So when we get back, we'll dive straight off into what is the United Nations, and so
sure, you bet.
Everybody joining me today, a very wonderful guest, written some very influential books, The Fearful Master, The Creature from Jekyll Island.
A voice spoke to me and said, I've got something I want to show you. I was so sure God had talked to me, and I was stunned by what I saw.
A direct fulfillment of this over 2,500-year-old prophecy. The United States will stand with Israel.
Why haven't I ever seen this before?
1/3 of humanity will die. What do these beasts symbolize?
The lion, the bear, the leopard.
The combined beast from Revelation 13 represents the end-time government of the Antichrist. Understanding the end time.
Now streaming on Endtime Plus and available to order at endtime.com/UET. Go to endtime.com/UET or call 800-ENDTIME.
Are you ready for an extraordinary journey to the region that is the focus of more end-time Bible prophecy than any other? Well, look no further. Join us on an unforgettable journey to Israel. Our adventure begins down in Jerusalem, where we will teach on the Mount of Olives, sing at the Garden of Gethsemane, walk down through the Kidron Valley. Then we'll make our way north, have a boat ride on the Sea of Galilee while visiting Joppa, Mount Carmel, baptize in the Jordan River, and so much more. Don't miss out on this incredible trip to Israel. Spaces are limited. Book your tour today. Visit endtime.com/tour or call us at 1-800-ENDTIME. Join us for an experience that you will never forget.
What if you could understand Bible prophecy? Dave Robbins, the host of the Endtime Show's TV and radio programs, is holding a free prophecy conference near you. Gain peace and understanding about what the Bible says concerning end-time prophecy. Call 1-800-ENDTIME or go to endtime.com/events to see when Dave will be in a location near you.
Welcome back, everybody. So, Mr. Griffin, if the United Nations is not the last great hope for peace on mankind, what is it?
Well, it's a hard way to answer it in a way that everybody would agree. But as I see it, the simple approach is to understand it's an idea. The United Nations is an idea that if all nations of the world join together with good intentions, good heart, and if they're willing to follow their conscience and so forth and do the right thing, they will be able to bring peace to the world, because there will no longer be any reason for wars, no reason for conflict, because men of goodwill will come together and sit around a table and work out their differences and make compromises and help each other. Right. And it's a great idea. We all love that idea. It's kind of a dream, a fantasy in my view, but anyway, it's a good, pleasant dream. So it's an idea, but it was put together and advanced, and it's being monitored and sold now by people who do not have that idea. Right. It'd be monitored and being sold by people who have quite a different idea, but they're pretending that that's their idea. Now, this is a harsh statement, but I think it's easy enough to prove when you look at who these people are and what they've done in the past and what they continue to do while they're advancing this great idea. Yeah. The United Nations is an idea that's been converted into being converted as we speak into a workable political entity made up of representatives from all the countries of the world. And they're nibbling away on the sovereignty of all the individual nations. And piece by piece, they're persuading these people who represent these nations to voluntarily give up and surrender their sovereignty in various areas, like in monetary field or in the educational field or trade, or usually it's commerce and political and so forth. Now it's military and information. They want to turn over control of the internet to the United Nations and so forth. Right. Piece by piece, the people in this group that are trying to build this idea into a true world government, I think that's what we're calling it. That's what they want it to be. And so they're building a world government around this false idea of peace and prosperity and health and friendship and love and so forth. But what they're really building is a world tyranny. Yes. And you know that's true because you look at who they are. Yeah. And if you look at the nations they represent and say, what kind of governments do they have in their own homeland? And you realize the world is full of tyrannical governments. And some of them are very, very tyrannical. And these are the people who are talking about peace. And it's a joke once you really begin to look into it and reading their documents. So it's a great facade. And it's being sold with a great idea, a real great idea. But it will be one of the worst things that ever happens to mankind if we allow it to continue to be formed into the final destination, which they hope it will be, which is a world government. Now, let me hasten to say, I am not opposed to world government. That may shock a lot of people. To me, it's not a question how big the government is or how many nations it encompasses, but what does it do? Right. What are its principles? Now, if we had a world government that was built on good Christian values and really built on voluntary cooperation instead of coercion, and really built on truth instead of lies, I'd be all for it. Yeah, absolutely. But that is not what we're talking about. See, they present an idea, and then it's bait and switch, because what you get is not the idea they sold. So a world government based on the principles that you and I share, I think would be very good. As long as it's not compulsory. Right. But of course, that's not what we're talking about.
Right. So the United Nations is built around a collectivist idea. And when I say collectivist, I think most people, their eyes glaze over. Collectivist, what's collectivism? This ideology of these people. So give us the definition of collectivism, and because I know, so scripturally, and I'm not going to spend much time on prophecy, I can prove scripturally that the end time world government will be a socialistic, communistic world governing body. And I think that I've seen on maybe some of your information that the collectivist position, there's two main branches of collectivism, communism and fascism. And so give us a definition of collectivism, please.
Yeah, thank you for that, because I think it's one of the most, if not right now, one of the top 2 or 3 topics that people have to get very clear on if they intend to preserve their liberty, or perhaps I should say restore their liberty, because it's being taken over by this idea of collectivism. There's another idea that sounds good if you don't examine it too carefully.
Right.
But collectivism was taught to me in school, and I bought into it. It's simply the concept in general, the mantra of collectivism is that the individual must be sacrificed, if necessary, for the greater good, for the greater number. So therefore, the group is more important than the individual.
Right.
That's collectivism. And as I say, I bought into that in school because my authorities, my teachers told me that that was a good idea, and it sounded good. I mean, after all, isn't that the basis of democracy? Right. That the majority rules. We do everything for the greater good. We don't want selfish people benefiting at the expense of others and so forth. So I bought into it. But that's not what we get. We get bait and switch, you see. So what we get under collectivism is that with this idea, demagogues can rise to power, and they say, I, or our party, represents the will of the majority. Yeah. Of course, they rig the elections, and they use propaganda, and they cheat, and they steal, and they murder, and they blackmail, and all that to make sure that they have the appearance of the will of the majority. But nevertheless, people believe they really do. I mean, most Americans, even though they know the elections are rigged, they still really think that their vote determines their political destiny. Right. They don't realize that this is part of the game, the scam, the bait and the switch. So collectivism is the idea where a tyrant or a demagogue or a political party can come to power and say, we represent the majority. And therefore, we will do whatever we want because it's for the greater good of society. And when you look at all of the greatest tragedies of recent history, they're sold on that basis. I don't want to take a lot of time on this, but perhaps one of the greatest that now is clearly documented is Pearl Harbor.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, we were told, I was taught in school, I was alive when Pearl Harbor happened. I was just a boy, but I remember it was a terrible thing. We said, oh, those Japanese was a sneak attack, how horrible. And all the American people were up in arms. We got to fight back and fight for democracy and all these things. But then I found out later on that the American government under Franklin Delano Roosevelt and his regime, they not only knew that the Japanese were going to attack, they did everything possible to entice them to attack, to aggravate them, to anger them, to play against their feeling of national honor, to make them feel that they had to respond militarily. And they made it easy for the Armada to come from Japan, the islands there, right to Pearl Harbor. They took all of our battleships, the best ones, out of Pearl Harbor so they weren't there. They knew that there were going to be some ships sunk, so they left the old junkers there to be sunk. They had to scrap them anyway. All the real ships of any value had been steamed out. Anyway, all the orders from Washington are now a matter of public record. They did everything from Washington possible to entice the Japanese to attack, to make sure no commercial vessels were going to be on the ocean on that path where the Armada would come. They were kept out so that no fisher ship would say, hey, guys, on the radio, they say, hey, there's something going on. There's a bunch of Japanese battleships and airplane carriers moving toward, So they said they didn't want that to happen. So the United States government was involved from top to bottom. The Americans had cracked the code of the Japanese. They knew what the Japanese were doing every step of the way, but they pretended like it was a sneak attack. And they did this because they wanted the American people to be enraged, so they would be behind the war and be willing to get into the war, which they wanted to do, so that they could be at the table for the so-called peace negotiations afterwards, so they could divide up the world the way they wanted to do it. So but the point I'm trying to make here is that it's all deception. And there are several points, but when you understand that this is how it really works, and people think that that they're determining their own political destiny, and they think that as anything could be done as long as it's for the greater good of society.
Yeah.
And that's where I was going with this, because at the end of the war, anybody who had said what I am now saying probably would have been stoned or put into prison. Yeah. How dare you say that about our brave men? Well, we had 3,000 or 4,000 sailors killed in that battle, and you say that was done with full knowledge from President Roosevelt, How dare you say that? And it was true, however, and now we know it's true because the documents have been unearthed. They're official military documents and diplomatic documents. It's proven. And so now we come along, one of the leading officials in the Roosevelt administration left his memoirs, his diaries behind, and they finally got published. And right in there, he said, yes, he said, it was a terrible thing we had to do. We had to sacrifice the lives of American sailors and civilians, 4,000 of them, to be exact. I think that was the number. And it was a terrible thing, but it was a great act of statesmanship on the part of President Roosevelt, because without doing that, we would have probably never gotten into the war. We would never have been able to be at the table to administer a just peace. And maybe the Japanese or the Germans would have attacked us unprepared, and we would have lost more lives than 4,000 lives. So it was a great act of statesmanship because the American people were not informed enough. They were not intelligent enough to know the necessity of getting into the war. So in other words, you see, it was for the greater good of the greater number that they did this. Every act of horrific political movement that you can think of in modern times is justified on the basis of collectivism. But the individual's liberty and the number of people involved must be sacrificed because it's for the good of society.
So after World War I, the answer to a world war ever happening again was in the minds of the international elite would be the League of Nations. After World War II, you had the United Nations. Do you think they'd be willing to go to a World War III because I know Antonio Guterres is constantly saying he's upset because the United Nations doesn't have the teeth or the enforcement methods that they really want to have. Do you believe they'd be willing to go to a World War III now I know this is speculation, but do you believe they'd be willing to go to a World War III, looking after World War I and World War II, to finally get the true world government that they really want? Do you believe they'd be willing?
Length.
I'm sorry?
I believe they would go to any lengths to get what they want. Yeah. That is their end game.
Yep.
So another world war, it makes no difference. They would go through 10 more world wars.
Exactly.
They would devastate the whole planet if necessary.
So it's the collectivist mindset.
It's the collectivist mindset.
Yeah, and that's the United Nations personified today.
Exactly.
That's exactly right. And if everybody could just understand what's really going on in our world today, and that's why these two books, they're so eye-opening. I mean, if you go through them, it will really open your mind up to what's really going on in the world, this world-governing collectivist mindset. I know that we've got an upcoming election here, and man, I've got this thing's going too fast for me. I wish we had like 3 or 4 of these interviews to do. But I know we got a coming election in 2024, and to me, one of the main issues is globalism versus a nationalistic type situation. In other words, when Donald Trump came into office, he started pulling us out of this world government in many ways. He pulled us out of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the Paris Climate Agreement, the Global Compact on Migration, and the World Health Organization, many other things. When Joe Biden gets in, he immediately turns right around and pushes us right back into it. So do you think, as far as in the collectivist mindset in this, do you think in the next election that would be one of the main issues that we could maybe, and I know you say that the election process is pretty much gone. Do you think that would be one of the main issues in the next election in 2024, just what we just talked about with this collectivist mindset? Because it's here in America as well.
Well, Dave, my view on that is maybe at another 10 or 20,000 foot elevation. I got a little bigger picture than just the election or the candidates by name. And I know from my research over the years that these people that we're calling collectivists. They have different names in different countries. They might be fascists in one country, communists in another. In another country, they might even be Republicans or Democrats.
Sure.
But they all think the same. They're collectivists. And these people go to school, literally. They have courses on how to manipulate public opinion and how to change society. And it's very interesting when you get into the study of some of the tax-exempt foundations in America, because the groups like the Carnegie Endowment Fund for International Peace and the Rockefeller funds and so forth are quite vocal about how they spend their money, millions and millions of dollars of it, to change the educational system, to convince people that collectivism is the wave of the future. And while individualism, which is our past ideology that made America great, in my view, that's the thing of the past, they say. It served its purpose. It was good at the time, but now it's collectivism is the wave of the future. And so if people understand how this happens, then they won't fall for it. But part of what I'm driving toward is the strategies that they develop call for conflict. Yeah. They know that if people will only give up their cherished position, their ideas of liberty and justice and so forth, if they're scared to death. Yeah. And they must be afraid of something. So they have to have conflict, wars, famines, pandemics, or something to keep people frightened. Yeah. Now, I know the music is coming, so we got to take a break, but I'm going to come back to that point because it's very, very important.
Yeah. Okay. We'll come back and then we'll get off into the Federal Reserve right after that.
They that understand what is taking place will instruct many.
Except a man is born again, he can enter or see the kingdom of God.
I don't care what label you've been given or what label you've given yourself. You are essential. You still matter.
This is a journey, and when we get to the other side of that, that's where our prize is. That's where our reward is.
End time is not going anywhere.
Satan and the elites of this world don't want you to understand the timeline leading to the second coming of Jesus. You can pinpoint where we are in the end time, understand how you fit in, and be filled with hope in God's plan by watching The Future According to Bible Prophecy. Go to endtime.com/future or call 800-ENDTIME. That's 800-363-8463.
Welcome back, everybody. Now, Mr. Griffin, man, it's going too fast for me, but I want you to finish your point there that you were making about everybody being in scare mode.
Yeah, and don't let me forget to come back to this little pamphlet on collectivism versus individualism.
We'll get to that before we get in the Federal Reserve.
Yeah, but part of the strategy is a very important part of the strategy for these people, regardless of what group they're in. They all use the same strategy, and that is that they know that the public must always have the impression that they are participating in their own political destiny. Yeah. So they must have a choice. And so for a longest time, we've had this choice between what we generally call left and right. We've got, the communists were taking over the world in the 1960s. That's when I came into the picture. Mm-hmm. So I thought, boy, this is bad. We got to fight those communists. And I was told in school, the communists are left-wingers and the Nazis and the fascists are the right-wingers, and they're opposites of each other. So that was my choice. I thought, which one do I want? I want to be a communist or a Nazi. Well, I didn't want to be either one, but that was the only choice was offered to me. And so there was a time actually in my youth, my younger years, I called myself a right-winger. And then I came to realize that they're the same. Yeah. I analyzed the philosophies and they're the same. They fight each other. They kill each other by the thousands, but they're not fighting over what they believe in, a difference in that. They're fighting over territory. They're fighting over who is going to be the top dog in the system of collectivism. And once I got that picture that the right and the left are not opposites, but they are playing the game of fighting each other. So whichever side you choose, you lose either way, but you have to choose. So once I saw that, it was easy for me to see it in politics, the same thing. In almost every country, they've got at least two major parties fighting each other. And people think, well, I got to be one or the other because they're opposite. And yet they're the same on either side. That's why in America, no matter which party is in office, the same thing continues to happen. Well, as the communists called it, in one way of describing it is they go 2 steps forward and 1 step backward. 2 steps forward, 1 step backwards. So the public always thinks there's a tug of war going on, and they're actually stopping it sometimes. Oh, we won. Oh, no, we didn't win after all. Oh, we're losing. Oh, we won a little bit, but we lost more. You've got to have this push and shove back and forth. Otherwise, the people will get onto the trick. So now you ask me what I think about the future of these elections. Ladies and gentlemen, they're playing that trick on us now. We've got to look beyond who you're going to vote for. You've got to start building these ideological movements from the ground up, independent of political parties. That's part of the trick. Don't fall for it. That's my message, and it makes me very unpopular because everybody wants this simple answer: who are you going to vote for? They think that they can go make an election mark on a checkbox, and they've satisfied their obligation of citizenship. And then they haven't even begun.
So with that said, hit your book there, and then we'll go off into the Federal Reserve.
Yes, thank you for that. Yeah, I'd be very remiss. I started to write about this topic of collectivism versus individualism, and it was for my next book, which is going to come out one of these days. But I decided recently, why wait for that? Because it might be a year before it's done. So I put it all together in this 50-page document. And I urge anybody who's interested in knowing about this thing, collectivism versus individualism. It's the idea or the issue behind all other issues. So I urge you, if you want this, it's free. Just come online and ask for it. And the way you do it is you go to the internet and type in chasm. That's what I call it, the chasms, you know, the great divide. So chasm.realityzone.com. Chasm.realityzone.com.
Got it.
And you get a free copy. You can download it, read it, print it out, whatever you want to do.
Good.
But please read it.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I'll actually go get a copy myself. I got a long plane ride ahead of me in the morning over to Israel, so I may do that.
Well, this will keep you awake.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I know, because I'm all into it. Really quick, just, man, a short period of time left. It's gone way too fast. The Creature from Jekyll Island, exposing the Federal Reserve. Everybody on the United States needs to read this book because the federal, and I'm going to try to cut some of this short, but with the Federal Reserve Act and different things that happened in 1913, the Federal Reserve is not just this great, wonderful bank that's trying to help our economy and fight inflation. Just in a nutshell, what is the Federal Reserve Bank? What are they really?
Well, Dave, you used the word quite correctly in the beginning of your program. You called it a cartel. And that's really what it is. A cartel is a group of commercial enterprises, mostly. Sometimes they're social, but in this case, it's commercial enterprises who are considered to be competitors. But they decide at some point that they don't want to compete because that's too expensive. You got to lower your prices, improve your product, and so forth to compete. So they get together and they say, okay, we're going to cooperate. We're not going to compete anymore, but we'll appear to be competitors so that the public will have no choice but to buy our products. And so they divide up their products and their territories. If you were making machines, they might say, well, okay, we're going to produce tractors and you produce automobiles. Or they might say, well, you get North America, I get South America. And they fix their prices and so forth. And they share patents and processes. And so eventually what emerges is an industry like the banking industry, made up of different banks, but they all charge approximately the same rates, offer the same services, and there's not very much competition between them except seemingly like in advertising or something like that. But their policies and their products and their prices are all the same and fixed. Well, the Federal Reserve System is a cartel like that. It's the same as a banana cartel or an oil cartel, but it just happens to be a banking cartel. And so these banks, the major banks run it, It's independent of the government, has nothing to do with the government, except that it wrote the Federal Reserve Act and took it to Congress and convinced those stupid congressmen and senators to vote it into law. So their private cartel agreement now is a law. And that's why people think it's an agency of the government, because if you don't agree and abide by their cartel agreement, which is now law, you can go to prison. Well, only government can do that, right? So the Federal Reserve must be a government agency. No, it's not. It's a private cartel that captured control of the government and is doing the dirty work for the cartel. So you come to the startling conclusion after all of this, and you see how it works in everyday life. The government is not controlling the banks. The banks are controlling the government.
Government, right. Yeah, so with them controlling our economy now, the Constitution gives the Congress, a group of elected officials, the ability to print money and control the economy and this, that, and the other and set the interest rates. However, they don't do that now. With the Federal Reserve Act, took that power away from them and gave it to this banking cartel you're talking about, and that's how they're controlling our economy. So let me ask you a question real quick. When you see articles, like I've got an article here from the Business Insider that says the Fed's fight against inflation hasn't caused a recession in the U.S. yet, but it could lead to a global downturn. So when you hear the term or the statement that the Fed is fighting inflation, what do you think of? First thoughts.
Well, I think it's laughable. It's almost like a comedy routine, because if you know anything about how money comes into existence through the Federal Reserve System, there's no question but that the Federal Reserve is the cause of inflation.
Yes.
So they have to say they're fighting it while they're creating it, otherwise people would be angry. But as long as they're creating it like crazy, but then say, hey, we got to do something to slow down this inflation, the average gum-chewing public says, oh, those are good people. They just said the right thing. It's easy. You just lie to them and they believe it.
Right. Yeah. So they, with them printing money and putting money into the system, printing money really out of thin air, because we went off of the gold standard, and now they just print money from nothing, putting it into into circulation. That creates more demand than there is supply. Boom, prices go up. There goes inflation. They caused it. But then in the news, they're saying, well, we're fighting it. And everybody thinks, well, the central bank's on our side, when they're really totally against us. Yeah. And
they're the ones that are doing it, and they know it. It's not, they're not making a mistake. These people are shrewd, evil people.
Yes.
And we have to quit honoring them and calling them sir. These people ought to be in prison.
Yes, absolutely. So with that said, knowing that they control our economy, but they're evil people, I want to enter, for sake of time, I have to bring up the central bank digital currency, because if they were to get in control of the central bank digital, if they were to implement a central bank digital currency. So what I was watching, Mr. Griffin, is that I saw these cryptocurrencies. You know, we worked on the dollar bill for years and things, but when I saw these cryptocurrencies come into play, and there were major corporations that were getting ready to take cryptocurrencies for a method of payment, I thought, man, I know what the Fed, I'd read your book and been through your book and knew what the Fed really was. I knew that they were going to attack this Bitcoin and these cryptocurrencies, because they were not going to allow a parallel system to run here in the United States. Then I knew they were going to attack this. Well, sure enough, back last year, Joe Biden comes out with his executive order that says, hey, we're going to look into the central bank digital currency. And what they're doing is the cryptocurrencies are decentralized. The central bank digital currency would be, obviously they say government ran, but it would be ran by the Federal Reserve. So I knew they were going to attack that, but the central bank digital currencies would be a very bad thing, because they've been wanting to go out, get on a cashless society for years, and the central bank digital currency would be the way they could finally get that thing across the finish line. But man, would they be able to economically sanction people here in the United States to get them to bow to their edicts? And man, when you talk about that collectivist ideology, it all plays into this big picture. But the central bank digital currency, can you speak to that for a second and how dangerous that would be?
Yes, Dave, you're right on target. It's the ultimate form of control over human beings. because just to clarify, a central bank digital currency is a digital currency, and that's the correct name for it. We shouldn't be calling these things cryptocurrencies.
Yes.
Because crypto means secret or private. There are a few of them left like that, but 90% of them, more than 90% of them. Bitcoin, for example, there's nothing private about it. Every transaction that you ever make on a Bitcoin blockchain is a matter of public record. That's what gives it its backbone, its strength, is that you can verify who did what and at what time, how much, and for what. Everything is out there forever. So it's not crypto, it's not secret at all. But from the very beginning, it was the whole idea of these digital currencies was more or less marketed to the public as being a way of controlling or escaping the power of the banks and the government. It gives you privacy. I thought, wait a minute, it doesn't give you privacy, and how are you going to escape the banks? Because I found out from the very beginning, the biggest banks were tooling up to support cryptocurrencies or digital currencies other than credit card money, which is a digital currency also, but what we now call cryptocurrency. They were tooling up to support it, and I found that they were spending millions and millions of dollars to research it and develop systems so they could use it. Well, there's one thing these people are not, and that's they're not stupid. So I knew right away that they thought that in the long term, they were going to use that to their advantage. But in the short term, they were using the illusion of escaping the control of the banks and the government as a means of popularizing it and getting people interested in it and saying, yeah, that's what we need. And now that's all coming to fruition. Now they're getting rid of the little cryptocurrencies because they're all failing. They come up by the thousands and they have a special offering and people profit from it, and then they collapse and so forth. When all this dust settles, there'll only be the central bank digital currencies and maybe Bitcoin as a means of exchanging large amounts of money between banks and corporations.
Yeah.
And
so I'm coming up to a break, but I'm gonna dive right back in right there, because a lot of people think that Bitcoin may be a way around this, but you're saying it's not going to be. And so I want to dive right back into that. We're coming up to a break. After the break, we'll get right back into it.
Hi, I'm Judy Baxter. When Irvin and I got married, we didn't realize that our calling would be a prophetic ministry. Since we started Endtime Ministries, there have been many times we weren't sure how we would pay the bills, but God has always provided. We started with a magazine, then went on radio and TV, and now we have the Jerusalem Prophecy College in Israel and online with Endtime Plus. The mission has always been to reach people with the gospel of Jesus Christ and the end-time message. Through the years, my husband would say, we will see revival like never before in the last days. We are living in the end time now. Thank you for walking this journey with us and continuing in prayer. You are a part of the team. Thank you for your generous support. It is necessary for God's purpose. The most important thing is that you are ready when the Lord comes. Our hope is to help prepare you for that day. God bless you, and we love you.
Welcome back, everybody, and I'm joined with special guest, Mr. G Edward Griffin. Many of our audience will know him. He wrote The Fearful Master Exposing the United Nations, The Creature from Jekyll Island, Exposing the Federal Reserve, and many other books. Look him up online. They're on there for sale, and certainly we want to purchase many of them. And Mr. Griffin, we're talking about the central bank digital currencies and cryptocurrencies, and I know that a lot of people that I've talked to have thought that because corporations may have been going to take, I know Elon Musk was going to take cryptocurrencies for payment for Teslas and things, that would be a way around a central bank digital currency should we get one. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, my thoughts are that what something can be and what it will be are different.
Yeah.
Yes, I think the digital currencies could be a force for good, but they're not in the hands of people that have that in mind, and that's the point. It's like a weapon, you know. A gun can be used for defense or offense, either one. Can be used to steal property or to protect your property. Digital currencies are the same way. Right now, they're in the hands of thieves and criminals, and that's where it's all headed. So let's quit talking about it being a force for good. As long as it's in the hands of evil people, it's not going to be that way.
Yeah.
So we're just wasting our time considering how wonderful it might be. No, it's not going to be wonderful.
Right.
It's going to be a force of control over the people.
So the thing people should, so that leads to the question, what do people do? If everything's headed digital, which I know there's an entity that works with the United Nations called the Better Than Cash Alliance. They work with governments and stuff around the world just to move people off of cash. Cash is freedom. I can give you $10, you go buy whatever you want. But if it's digital and even they're making these central bank digital currencies programmable, then if we move into a cashless society, you're stuck. I mean, you're in a jail cell, basically.
You get what they give you. And by the way, it's not your money anymore. It used to be when you took money to the bank and you deposited it, they called it a deposit, which implied that it was your money and you can get it back. And they have two kinds of deposits. There's a demand deposit and a time deposit. Most people didn't know that. I didn't at first. Most people put the money in demand deposits, and they're told by the bank that you can come and demand your money because it's your money and you can have it back on demand. But in some cases, you would get higher interest rates if you put it into a time deposit. In that case, you signed an agreement that you couldn't demand it. They might give it back to you or not, depending on if they had it, because you acknowledge that they would be lending it out for interest. So that was more honest, but very few people got involved in that. It was all demand. So when more than about 3% of the population came in to demand their deposits, the bank didn't have it. That would be a run on the bank. And first thing you know, the whole system would fall. So, but now we don't even have that. Very quietly in the last couple of years, the laws were passed which make that money, once you put it in the bank, no longer yours, but theirs. It's like you're investing in General Motors. When you buy stock in General Motors, you give it to General Motors. Now you are an investor, not a loaner or a depositor. So most people don't realize that the money you put in your bank, even today, no longer belongs to you. And if the bank should fail or should make a bad investment and lose money, it's too bad. It's your money that they lost, but it was really considered legally now their money, and you're not entitled to any compensation whatsoever. Now, they may give it to you to keep the population happy. You know, the Federal Insurance Deposit Corporation might give you some money, which is the best we can do. But we're out of money, so we have to print some more. And the more they print to pay you back, of course, the more inflation there is and the higher your prices are. So you're not really getting paid back. So anyway, that's the trick. It's a foul system. And the sooner people wake up to the system, the better off they will be.
So let's say let's say somebody hears this program and they say, oh my goodness, I got to do something. Those guys got me stirred up. And again, I'm not a financial advisor, and I know that you're not a financial advisor. That's not the whole goal here. The goal is just for to educate people what's going on. But let's say, for instance, let's say I had $20,000 in the bank, or at least I thought I did. And what should somebody do with that? I get calls all the time saying, hey, I kind of get an idea what's coming. I got some money in the bank. What do I do with it? I heard, it's funny, I heard you say one time that you should potentially buy a warehouse full of cheap wine. And because so you're saying basically move away from a bank and maybe get what, hard assets or what?
Well, I think the answer to that is twofold.
Okay.
Dave. First of all, if you're standing on the railroad track and you see the engine you see the headlight coming towards you, and you feel the ground rattling, and you know that train's coming down the track. What do you do? Get off the track. That's the first thing. So if you have a lot of money in the bank, and we know that the bank is going to collapse or become a totalitarian instrument, what do? Get your money out of the bank.
But now, you still have to function. You still have to function in society, though.
Yeah, that's where they get you. If you have no other way to function, then they've got you. You have to keep it in the bank, and that's what this central bank digital currency is all about.
Exactly.
You have to be in the bank.
Right.
And so that's why it's so evil. So actually, I've been using cash quite a bit. I get used to using my credit card because I always pay the card off within 60 days and I don't pay any interest. So I like the idea of using the bank's money for a month.
I do
but
the
now,
same thing.
of course, that's not going to work if they go to digital currency
Right.
from the central bank.
Right.
So I've been using cash again lately. I kind of like it. I'm thinking of getting a little red cap that says, make cash great again, or something like that.
Yeah, no doubt.
That's what we need to do. We need to
right.
keep the cash in circulation.
That's exactly right. Because cash is freedom, and
Cash is
that's the thing.
So is your key to freedom. Yeah.
Yeah. So if let's say they do go to a central bank digital currency, what can people do? I mean, at this point, we really don't know. I mean, there's not really an answer for that. If all the major.
Well, that leads me to the second part of my answer
yeah,
to your question. You said, what can we do? The first thing is get your money out of the bank.
Yeah.
And of course, then that leads to the question, what do you do with it now that it's out of the bank? What form is it? If it's in cash, that's one thing. If you got $20,000 in cash, you got to worry about somebody stealing it, which is not as bad as leaving it in the bank and not having to worry about somebody stealing it because you know they're going to steal it. You don't have to worry about it, it's for certain.
Yeah.
So, having cash to guard is not as dangerous as not having cash that you couldn't guard no matter what you did.
Yeah.
So, but my second part of that question is whatever you do, and I kind of like bullion. I like silver and I like gold
So hard assets.
and all of that because it's always throughout history survived all kinds of crises. And
Can the government confiscate that like they did before? I mean, wouldn't that?
Oh, sure.
Oh,
sure.
So that's a
Oh,
possibility.
absolutely. See, the problem, you got to stop the government from having that kind of power.
Okay, so that's the key.
They can just show up at your door at 3 o'clock in the morning and not even have a warrant. They don't have to have a reason. They just say, you, into the truck.
Yeah.
That's what we're fighting, you see.
Yeah.
We're fighting against that. So quit thinking about, how can we escape all of this? We've got to defeat it. We can't escape it. We have to stop it.
Yeah.
So now that's my answer to your question.
Yeah.
What do we do with this money? You better spend a great deal of it in building a movement to stop this thing from continuing.
Yeah.
And that's where I come to, first of all, learning about what collectivism and individualism is. And if anybody comes in and asks for that, we're going to use your email to send you some other information. And we'll be talking about Red Pill University campuses, where we build organizations in the local level, where we can build this new system from the ground up. So we can have influence over our county board of supervisors, our sheriff's office, our city hall, our board of education, and so forth, and move upward. Instead of waiting around and say, who are you going to vote for? We'll start building the system from the bottom up, you see? So that's what we have to do with that money.
Well, so that's what really they have done for years. So the Council on Foreign Relations, isn't that devoted to grooming politicians and different things to take these positions? Isn't that what the Council on Foreign Relations does? That they have prepped people to take positions in Congress and different places. Isn't that a lot of what the Council on Foreign Relations does?
Well, they do that, but that's sort of a secondary issue. They're more or less a think tank. They're kind of a directive center.
Yeah.
They don't really do much, but they set policy and they select people who they're going to recommend and put into positions of authority and power. They're the brain of the whole operation, you might say.
Yeah.
But you never find them out with a placard and say, vote for this or vote against that.
That's what I'm saying, but I'm saying they're the brainchild behind it. So the Council on Foreign Relations, the Trilateral Commission, all these different things, they're grooming people and getting influential people in these positions, getting the major corporations to back it. And, a lot of these major corporations, the CEOs and different things, they're members of the Council on Foreign Relations.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely, yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, the Council on Foreign Relations has about I think less than 5,000 members, but they're the hidden government of the United States.
Yeah.
You look at the presidents of the United States, the congressmen, the senators, the Supreme Court justices, the head of the CIA, the chief of staff of the military, the ambassadors, all the people that make all the important decisions. You'd be surprised how many of them are members of the Council on Foreign Relations. The head of the universities, the head of ABC, CBS, NBC, the labor unions, on down the line.
Yeah.
The Council on Foreign Relations is everywhere with only 5,000 people.
Yeah. And they're the ones really running the show.
They're running the show.
That's exactly right. Wow. And that's what man, I'm going to say just a fraction of the people in the United States really have a clue what's going on with these government officials, which that's really not government. The council, that's not a government entity. And so we like to say, well, government's running this and that. But Joe Biden, he's just really a puppet that's being told what to say. And, you know, he's not really running anything. They call it Bidenflation, but that's a joke.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sorry to say that's been the case for a long time in both political parties.
Yeah.
It's not just Biden.
No, I know.
But some are more obvious than others.
Yeah, that's correct.
Look at their backgrounds. Look at their life history and what they do other than when they're on camera. And you can find out what they're about.
Well, George H.W. Bush, he's the one that come out and many of them will start talking about the New World Order and different things like that. And they've all been globalist.
Yeah, they have been.
Yeah, Bill Clinton was a liberal.
If you wait around for the Republican or the Democratic Party to shoot your candidate, they're going to be globalist, whether they say so or not.
Exactly. That's exactly right. So,
that's how the system works.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, wow. The best way for people to prepare. Tell us again about your website for the Chasm, real quick, because we're coming here to an end. I got about a minute left. Tell us your website where people can get that, because they really need to understand collectivism.
They really do. So you go to the website, and it's Chasm, CHASM, .realityzone.com.
Realityzone.com.
You can download this 50-page report. I think you'll like it.
Yeah.
In fact, I wrote something just before I went to bed last night that I thought I was going to make into a ad. Let me go away from. Well,
absolutely.
So I've lost the piece of paper. What
That's
did I do
okay.
with it? Oh, here it is. Here it is.
Yeah.
Here it is. I kind of brought it. I'm going to try and make an ad out of this.
Okay.
This is short. I'll read it to you.
Yeah.
It says, communists don't like it. Fascists don't like it. Nazis don't like it. Socialists don't like it. Liberals don't like it. Progressives don't like it. Bureaucrats don't like it. Control freaks don't like it. Most politicians don't like it. You probably will like it.
Sure.
Read The Chasm. Collectivism versus individualism.
Yeah. Well, Mr. G. Edward Griffin, man, I've looked forward to this interview for many years. Hopefully we can do it again soon, cover a lot more topics. Thank you, my friend. God bless you. And
Dave,
God bless
you for
all your
inviting
efforts.
me and listening to me ramble on.
Absolutely.
Here. I hope it made some sense.
Thank you, my friend. You.